The amygdala is a small hidden structure in both sides of your brain that plays an important role in fear and anxiety. To understand how, we first have to look at the purpose of fear. And that is, of course, not just to make us feel incredibly uncomfortable, but it is to provoke quick actions to get us out of the dangerous situation. And quick actions typically means movements. Like in the ancient times, out in the wilderness, when something is dangerous, you might want to either run as quickly as possible or fight back as hard as you can. That's why the state you want to have is called the fight or flight response. So what would your muscles need to move quickly and strongly to either run or fight? Lots of oxygen. And they get that by different mechanisms, one of them being the heart beating strongly to pump it to them. So that means we need a mechanism that makes sure our heart works harder when we're in a possibly dangerous situation, quickly, very quickly. And here the amygdala comes into play, because the amygdala is one of the first to be informed about any kind of important stimuli, like something you see, something you smell, something you hear. The information is sent by the thalamus and reaches the amygdala before it comes to our consciousness, something that happens in the frontal lobe of the cortex. Being informed about a new stimulus, the amygdala kind of goes through its own data bank based on previous experiences, and if this stimulus was earlier associated with a really dangerous situation, the amygdala immediately informs the hypothalamus to activate the sympathetic nervous system, a bunch of nerves leading from your brain through the spine and from there to different organs in the body. This will lead to some changes in the body to make it ready to fight or flight, partly by nerves from the sympathetic nervous system leading directly to the organs involved, and partly by making the adrenal gland release the hormones adrenaline and noradrenaline into the bloodstream, from where they swim to the organs and have their effects there. So all in all, the sympathetic nervous system makes your heart beat faster and stronger to pump the oxygen to the muscles. It widens your airways to make your body get enough oxygen in, and it makes sure your blood is pumped to the right places where it is most needed right now, the muscles, and not to the places that can wait, your digestive system. Like you can digest later, no need to waste your oxygen on that now. It is doing that by widening and narrowing the blood vessels. Quick side fact, now you can imagine why you're getting stomach problems when stressed for a long time. Your body sees you in danger constantly and deprioritizes the digestive system in the blood supply. So the sympathetic nervous system also widens your pupils to make sure you see enough and get some sugar reserves that were saved in your liver. And all of this is ordered by the amygdala before you can even consciously grasp the situation. And together with the activation of the fight or flight response comes the feeling of fear. So we get extremely afraid without even comprehending the situation yet. And this is why it is called the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is taking over the thinking part of the brain. All of this sounds like a perfect system, or at least for the ancient days. You recognize a dangerous animal, you rush away. But the ancient days were very hard, but also simple. Simple because the same stimulus mostly meant the same thing, but not anymore. While the amygdala hijack still is extremely useful in some situations, like jumping away from an oncoming car, there are situations where it gives us problems. Many people that have experienced war, for example, struggle with New Year's Eves because of the fireworks sounding like bombs. And no matter how often they're telling themselves it is just fireworks, the amygdala is doing its work, putting the body in a fight-or-flight mode without listening to what their logical thoughts say. The amygdala is hijacking the brain. And lots of other people with PTSD can recognize that they get triggered by something somehow related to their trauma. For example, the apartment where they were raped smelled of coffee, and afterwards they stop drinking coffee because they get a panic attack each time they smell it, even though they know the coffee had nothing to do with it. And now the next problem is, you have probably already experienced how emotions influence your thoughts. Like when you're in a bad mood, you see things very pessimistically. Or like people being in love, seeing everything through their rose-colored glasses. When you feel the fear triggered by the fear response caused of the amygdala, you kind of start wearing your fear glasses. Often that means you try to logically explain why you should be afraid and start imagining catastrophic outcomes of the situation that in reality are extremely unlikely. And that triggers the amygdala even more through pathways sent from the frontal lobe to the amygdala. Your panic gets even worse and worse, all after a false alarm in the beginning. So what can you do about it? Telling yourself how the situation is not dangerous, arguing about how unlikely it is something bad happens, that might help you take off the fear glasses and therefore prevent that the fear gets even worse or even calm down the amygdala. But it can't stop the amygdala from causing the fight or flight response in the first place, as that is something happening before the situation becomes conscious. So therefore, the amygdala cannot learn from logic, but only from experience. So the only way to help it is to get into the same situation again and again, to teach the amygdala that nothing bad happens. And that is the idea of exposure therapy, the core of cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety and PTSD. But how does that actually happen? How does the amygdala save and delete the information in the what I call database? That happens through fear conditioning and extinction. When a neutral stimulus like a sound arrives at the amygdala, it will stimulate the nerves, but not strongly enough to initiate a fear response. But when something naturally unpleasant like pain stimulates the amygdala, it does initiate a fear response. If now those two come together, then the synapses to that neutral stimulus get stronger, a process called long-term potentiation, and eventually the activation of the neutral stimulus will be strong enough to initiate a fear response. It becomes a conditioned stimulus. And unfortunately, the amygdala will not forget that connection again. Never. So how do we get rid of the symptoms then? It is because we can create a new competing memory that goes through a different brain in the amygdala that will lead to a no fear response by inhibiting this signal for the fear response. And when we repeat that a lot of times, the new memory will be strong enough to finally completely inhibit the fear response triggered by the old memory. If you liked the video, don't forget to check out my other videos and follow my channel.